forging silver wire from ingot. Once you are comfortable with bronze, copper, and would like to start working with silver, I have found that commercially available silver from places like Rio Grande, especially fine silver, are pretty costly. So for the most part, the more thinner gauge of wire, 18 gauge and up, usually 18 to 26 or 28, those are relatively inexpensive for larger quantities. Once you want to get enough quantity to do plated arm rings, plated bracelets, plated finger rings, things like that, and you're using 10, 12, 14 gauge wires, those costs add up really quickly. The cost of silver rises exponentially with the amount that you'll need to do it. So I found that it is cheaper to buy a 1 ounce silver bar from places like APMEX or JM Bullion or Westminster Mint, and then cut that into the sizes that I need. So I mostly use 1 ounce bars. I cut those in half or I cut those in thirds. It is cheaper for me to do that and then make the wire myself than it would be to buy from a commercially available retailer. You can get at least 3 wires out of each ounce of silver, depending on how you cut it and how thin you want the wires, which is a little more cost effective than buying 1 ounce of wire from a retailer. 1 ounce of silver generally costs about $30 an ounce. An ounce of silver wire costs you anywhere between 30 to 34. So it's not a huge savings, but as you get into 3 or 4 ounces, it starts to add up pretty quickly. So this guide will start to help you make your own wire from start to finish. The process can be challenging and it does take some time and patience, but the results making the wire are more than worth it. So hopefully by the end of this 3-hour demonstration, you'll be able to make your own wire to use in your own projects as the end goal. So the tools and materials are fairly similar to any metalworking or plated project that you'll be needing. First and foremost, you're going to need a silver bar. Before you draw that out, make sure you cut the silver to the right weight. If you want to do 2 half-ounce bars, cut them in half, or you can cut them into thirds. Don't worry too much about getting them into an exact equal weight. They may not look like they're even, but they're probably closer than you think they are. And as long as you have it cut into relatively equal halves or thirds, everything will work out in the end. We're going to use a Matte Pro torch for annealing. You can use propane as well, but Matte Pro has a faster heat transfer and it does burn hotter. So I find it a little easier and faster to work this way. We're going to use a measuring tape to get the wire to the right length. So as we go through and draw it out, we're going to want to make sure that we get the wire as close to the right length that we want as possible. And the measuring tape will kind of help us with that. Another option you can use is digital calipers, as long as they go over 6 inches. My calipers only go to 6 inches, and the wires I usually draw between 7 and 9. So I can use the digital calipers at least for the first 6, and then I'll have to switch to a measuring tape. You are going to need some fire bricks because we're going to anneal on the fire bricks. You're going to need a bucket of water. The quench bucket here is used when we anneal it. I quench the silver right away and cool it down rapidly. You can let it air cool. It does take some time. I have not found any problems in air cooling as opposed to quenching. I haven't had any problems with cracks or fractures or the silver breaking because of the sudden temperature difference. So you can just quench it and get right back to working quickly. We are going to need a pair of pliers. The pliers are going to be used to pick up the hot metal. Of course, you will need an anvil, and then you're also going to need a hammer so we can start shaping and drawing out the silver. So the method that I'm going to outline and demonstrate today is the method that I use for making all of my silver wires. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you how they would have been made in period. I have not found much evidence as to how they would have been made. The Mastemere chest included a couple draw plates and some silver filings and cast-offs. Draw plates are used modernly to create wire as well. So it stands to reason they also could have used a draw plate for that purpose. However, some period pieces do have the leftover indentations of hammer marks. So it's pretty possible that just like today, each silversmith had their own preferred method of doing it. Some may have used a draw plate, some may have done it by hand. Both methods, either way, both methods in modern use provide us with a similar end result as to what has been found in period. So we can kind of extrapolate from that at least our modern methods are fairly close to what have been used in period. Today's fine silver is 99.9% pure. In period, their silver would have been adulterated with a couple other materials, so it would have been closer to about 95 to 97% pure. Some have gone as low as modern sterling silver, which is 92.75% pure, just depending on the copper content. But most period silver is anywhere between 95 to 97% pure. So this fine silver is more pure than what can be found in period. But because I do not have the methods currently to be able to make my own silver alloy, it's what I use for the jewelry. So the first thing we're going to want to do is take the silver bar and cut it. In this instance, I'll be doing a 1/2 ounce bar of silver. So I have the silver cut in half. So I'll be using this piece here, and we're going to go ahead and start drawing it out. So first and foremost, we're going to want to anneal it. So annealing is the process of heating the silver and then quenching it, and that makes it softer and easier, more malleable, much easier to work than if it's hard. Silver does work harden as you hammer it, so we're going to want to make sure that we anneal pretty often. One of the things we want to avoid as we start squaring this out and then eventually drawing it down and rounding it, we want to try to avoid any flaking or cracking or stress cracks that may appear. Those can be fixed if you catch them early, but if you don't and the piece does end up fracturing, then I think the best option there would be to melt it down and make another 1/2 ounce ingot and then give it another try. So we want to try to avoid any flaking or cracking. So anneal often, and unfortunately, this is not something that can be attributed to a certain amount of time. So a good portion of that's trial and error. As you go through, you will learn and kind of feel how the metal reacts, how nice and soft silver feels and sounds versus how hardened silver feels and sounds. That is just a learning curve. And by the end of the first 1/2 ounce bar, you should have a good handle and a good knowledge of how that works. So you should be able to tell pretty quickly. So we're going to go ahead and anneal this bar here. Unlike bronze, when bronze anneals, we want it to get that nice red color. Silver has a lower melt point. So we don't want it to get quite to that point because it will start to flow and melt. Silver, we just want a nice kind of a pinkish color. We don't want it to get too hot because then we, of course, will start melting the silver, which then we'll have to continue on, try to make another ingot and go from there. So when you start squaring it out, first thing we want to do is make sure we hit all sides equally. So we want to try to avoid any deformation. It is going to happen, but we can fix that quickly and easily by striking all surfaces equally. So I'm going to start on the edge here as opposed to the flat. So I hold 1/2 in my fingers, and then we're going to start on 1/2 here. And then we're going to rotate to the flat side. And then we're going to rotate to the other edge. And then we're going to rotate to the second flat side. So we have the first half done. Now we're going to go to the next side. And then we're going to do the other side, the flat, the other edge, and then the other flat side. So that's how we're going to be doing this entire process. We're going to do edges, flats, and rotate in a pretty even pattern. That way all sides get struck equally. As you strike down on the edges, you're going to notice that the side kind of folds. At tacos would be a good term for it. It starts to look like a taco. We can fix that by putting it edge side down or edge flat side down. And on the side that is, so if this side is the one tacoing, we're going to flip it and reverse it. We're going to hammer it flat. And that flattens out the edge again, so it's nice and even. We're going to try to avoid having that roll over on us, because otherwise we're going to have to reflatten that back out. So we're going to go ahead and keep annealing and keep squaring. My advice is to buy the silver wherever it's cheapest. Does not matter what the design is, because the design's going to get destroyed anyway. Just make sure everything is still looking pretty even here. So we can see it's starting to get a little bit longer than its counterpart here. All right, so as we hammer, we want to make sure we don't put too much force onto the silver. Silver is quite a bit softer than its counterparts like bronze. Does not take much to make silver into the right shape. So let the hammer do most of the work. So as you're hammering it, just kind of let the hammer rise and fall. We don't want to put a lot of our own power into it. We just kind of want to let the hammer do its own work. So kind of keep your hand a little nice and loose. We don't want to force it too much, but that does lead to cracks and fracturing. We want to make sure the silver bar stays as straight as possible. Sometimes it has a tendency to curve. All right, and we're just going to keep repeating this process as we start drawing this down. as the bar starts to get smaller and thinner, you will notice that the annealing temperature is achieved faster. We just want to make sure that we don't overshoot that annealing temperature. Especially as it gets faster and faster, it'll take less time to reach it, and there is more of a chance of just letting that go from annealing temperature straight to flowing. It's a pretty quick flip there. So just keep an eye on it, make sure that it doesn't get too hot. I prefer to work my silver cold. You can work fine silver hot. Working fine silver hot basically makes it the closest thing you can have to a silver metal Play-Doh. So you can work it hot. I just prefer working it cold. If you work it hot, you need to consistently keeping at an annealing temperature of just slightly pink. Unfortunately, it's a little hard to do if you don't have the correct setup. You would need to have a torch continuously working or blowing onto the anvil so you can continually keep it nice and warm. Just simply for space and the shop that I have, working it cold is the best option for me. But of course, if you prefer or you want to try working it hot, that is perfectly fine. Unlike sterling silver, it should not crack or fracture, so perfectly safe to do so. All right, so we are getting there. We are a little bit thin still. We're getting a nice, decent length out of here. So we're starting to get a little more square than we were. And that is what we are looking for. All right, let's see how this is going. Check to make sure it's still nice and even and straight, not warping on us. All right, so we are starting to see more of a square form on this than we had previously. So it's still a little bit thin, starting to get a little thicker on the edge here. And we can see starting to get a little bit thinner on the flats. So we keep going. Switch hands. as we keep going and continue to get to the part where it looks more and more square, it's going to be really easy to try and rush through the final part. So the best advice I can give is to have some patience. If you start rushing through it now, it is going to start cracking, it could fracture, it's going to start folding in on itself. The best thing that I can preach about is just patience. It's really easy to start getting excited because you're toward the end of at least squaring it out. So you're almost finished with getting that portion finished, and you can start working on drawing it out to the right length and then rounding it down. Try not to look too far ahead because you'll end up rushing through it. We just want to make sure that everything is nice and neat and even, no problems, as seamless as possible. So patience, 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 and anneal often. All right, we are almost completely squared out. I think probably a few more passes and we'll have it. All right, we are at the point where it's starting to take on a more square profile. So we're going to do one half and then the other. We are slowly getting there. All right, we're almost there. All right, I think we have this pretty well squared. So we're left with a square piece of silver. So now we begin the process of drawing it out to the right length. First, though, the ends of these have taken a more of a rhombus shape than a square shape. So we need to fix that. So when you're forging down to a square, shaping it to a rhombus is pretty common. It does happen. So what we'll have to do first is kind of round this out, and then I'm going to go back and re-square it out and then draw it from there. So first I'm going to anneal it. All right, once it's annealed, I'm going to start by, I'm going to have to round this whole bar down and then I'll re-square it. So to round it down, we're going to lay it with one of the edges facing up, not the flat side, but the edge. And we're going to hammer down on the edge. We're going to rotate it to the next edge, 90 degrees. And then we're going to go to the next edge. And then the next one. And I do this in portions, so I don't do the whole piece at once. It's now taken on more of an octagonal shape. So I'm going to start hammering it and then twisting it on the anvil as I hammer. And make sure that I'm going to make sure that it's starting to take a nice round shape. And I'm going to repeat this all the way down the wire. And this part will take a little bit of time, but once it's rounded out, we'll go back and start squaring off sections of it to draw it out. About halfway down the bar now, rounding it out. Once I get all the way down, I'm just going to give the whole thing another quick rundown before we continue. All right, just about finished here. All right, I think we have a pretty even round bar now. So I'm going to try to square it out again and see if I can get a better square shape. Just going to clean this off a little bit to see if I can see any flat ends. Hit this area one more time. All right, so we have a pretty rounded bar now. So I'm going to go ahead and start squaring this off again. so we can draw it out to the right length. I am aiming for about 6 3/4 is what I'm hoping to get out of this one. It is absolutely doable. You can get as long as you need or as long as you are comfortable making out of this bar. And we're currently just under, I'm sorry, we're just over 4 inches. So we only have a couple inches to go. So I do this in sections, and then I'm gonna add on to that section as I go up the bar. I don't want to square it all at once because I do not want it to get a rhombus again. And it may happen anyway, despite my best efforts. Okay. So we're starting to get the rest of it squared out now, just adding on bit by bit until the whole bar is squared. All right. We have once again have a fairly even square. So now we can start drawing this back out again. We're aiming for, like I said, for about 6 3/4. We're about a 4 1/8. So All right. So once we get to the process of drawing the silver out to the correct length, we're going to want to start hammering in a very deliberate fashion. So you're, depending on how you want to set up the anvil, you either hammer strike and pull away from you, like, or pull it or push it like this, or you can set it up facing away from you, and when you hammer, you push. This is going to give us what we need to get the length. It's going to move the entire material across itself. So this is what's going to move the material for us. Hammering straight down is just going to flatten those sides a little more. It's not going to move as well. So we're going to want to go ahead and start in the middle is where I start. I put a taper on both ends. So starting in the middle, and as you go down toward the end, will give you a nice even taper. Now we'll repeat the same with the other half. And we want to make sure it's still staying in a nice, relatively even square shape. If it goes back into a rhombus, what we'll just do is round it back out again and re-square it. But so far, so good. It seems to be holding that nice, even square, which we want. Doesn't seem to be flaking too badly. There's one spot that I'm looking at that has a little bit of a flake in it. I'm just going to go ahead and right now try to remove that. It's a very, very, very tiny flake. And it's probably a result of striking it either too hot or too much while it was cold. That will get worked into the piece, but it's not one that will overall affect it. And we're going to go ahead and continue moving on down this square rod here. We're getting a little bit more length here. Grab my tape measure. We'll see how we're doing. The length moves pretty slowly. It doesn't gain a ton of length very quickly, so it does take quite a few passes. We started at about 4 1/8. We're at about 4 3/4 now. So we still have a couple inches to go before we are ready to round it out. Now, more than ever, is when we're going to want to keep an eye on the square piece to make sure it's not flaking too badly or cracking. We've done the work to get here, and we want to make sure that we don't have to restart with another piece. So flaking or cracking is more prevalent and typically occurs when it's either worked too hard, if you're putting too much force behind the hammer blows, or if it's worked when the silver is too hard, and then any force that's transferred into the material will start to flake and crack it. So this is where we're really going to want to start paying attention to the material itself. Since we've gone through and at least squared it out, you should have some kind of an idea by now of how it feels and sounds when it's soft versus how it feels and sounds when it's not as soft and easily worked. So really listen to that. If you think it's getting too hard, or you think, you know what, it sounds just a little bit different, go ahead and anneal it, because you can't, there's no such thing as annealing too much. But if you work it too hard, your progress to this point will be lost. I wouldn't do much more than, if you're going to divide it in half, I wouldn't do much more than 1/2 per side, or total 1 pass per square side. Because once you get past that, it does seem to be like the silver starts to harden a little too much, and we want to just avoid any problems, just so we don't lose our progress here. This bar is staying in its nice square shape. So with any luck, we'll be able to get it completely drawn out while still in the square. And we won't have to round this out again until the end. little bit of a curve here. This end is going a little odd. Do that a little bit of a fine adjustment just to make it nice and square. But otherwise, everything is going pretty well. Let's see where we're at lengthwise. All right, we're just over 5 inches now. So we are slowly but surely getting there. This is probably the more time-consuming part of the process because drawing it out does take quite a bit of patience. While we go through the process, if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to let me know. I'm putting just a slight taper on each end as I go, just so it has a nice tapered end. Most of the pieces in period had a slight taper toward each end of the wire. Some of them were just straight wires, same thickness throughout. But the vast majority of them had a very slight taper. So I'm trying to put in just a nice little one just at each end so it has a nice, elegant shape to it. One end is starting to become more of a rhombus again. Then we're going to want to address that. And the rhombuses are going to happen whether you want them to or not. It is unfortunately just a side effect of trying to make round things square. So I'm going to go ahead and start trying to at least square this back out again. And I think I'm just going to round this side out and then we'll square it back. See where we are lengthwise, get an idea. So I know how much longer we need to go first. Just about 5.5. So I'm going to go ahead and round the whole thing out one more time and then see what length we get. And then I may or may not square it back out, just see where we are, see if we need any more length. And if we do, I'll go ahead and square it back out again. Otherwise, I'll finish this from round and see where we go. I got the whole thing annealed. We'll go ahead and start rounding this out again. See what kind of length we're working with. I am going to switch to a slightly heavier hammer to get the shapes round. This one is about a 16-ounce hammer, so it's a little more weight behind it. So it should get it nice and round. And then switch back to the other one. This one's about, the one I've been using is about 12 ounces. I'll switch to this one so I can go ahead and flatten the other edges now. Start rounding it with this one and see how we go. Getting a nice round shape now. All right, we are getting a nice round wire here at the end. This other side is still relatively squared. We're going to try to at least round that part out as well. All right. Moving on down the line. And then as always, be careful striking the edge because we don't want to end up with any flaking or cracking if possible. Minor flaking should be fine. We don't want big chunks coming off. So if it starts to feel like it's getting a little too hard to work, we're going to want to go ahead and anneal it again. If there is one thing that you can take away from today, it's anneal often. Annealing is the most important part of any metal project. As we round out the wires, both now and at the end, we want to make sure that the tools, at least the hammer, is free from more any major scratches or indentations. You want it to be as smooth as possible. Your piece will pick up those indentations in the hammers. So scratches, if you are using just like a ball peen hammer is a great starting hammer for metalworking and specifically jewelry. Ball peens are great on the flat side and on the curved side. But if the flat side has any nicks or dings or scratches, the piece will pick those up. So you want to make sure the hammers are surfaced nice and smooth, and if possible, at least up to a bright shine, if not a mere shine, because we don't want those indents to end up on the finished silver wire, because that does detract from the wire itself. almost rounded out here. We have a little bit left to go, and then we'll see what length we're working with and see if we need to get this squared back out again. I think we will. All right, we're doing pretty well, but there's a spot in the center, right about here, that is not going round on me. I'm going to pull out this hammer. This one is about 7 ounces, and it's a little smaller. So we can get that into that tighter space a little easier than the large-headed one can. I would say at minimum for the hammers to start, a ball peen is great, and then get yourself a small, like 5 or 7 ounce tack hammer from Harbor Freight. And the tack hammer will be able to get into that finer detail spots a lot easier than the ball peen will be able to. And it'll be a lot nicer on the finishing work, especially if you plan on drawing out the ends anything thinner than like 10 or 14 gauge. It'll be able to draw those out really, really nicely without too many problems on the wire itself. So no stressing or cracking because it is a nice, small, lightweight hammer. We are pretty much rounded out. So let's take a measurement really quickly, see where we fall on length. Most of my time is spent wondering where that tool I just had went. We're at about 6 inches. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and draw this out just a little bit more. Because it doesn't need to be drawn out a ton more, we're only 3/4 of an inch away. I'm going to go ahead and leave it round, and I'm going to draw it out while it's round. So that way, if it goes, I don't have to worry about it going back into a round bit and overshooting it. So let's anneal it, and we'll go ahead and finish this up. Now, I ended up with a pretty nice taper on one side and not so much of a taper on the other. So because I only need that little bit of length, I'm only going to focus on the side that doesn't have the taper because I want to get a nice even look here. So this half goes up and into a nice tapered look, and the other half is just a straight wire. So I'm only going to focus on this part really because I want to get it nice and even. And I'm going to see if I can grab out my digital calipers here, so I can get the taper as even as possible. And then for the taper, I'm going to use the small hammer again because I don't want to use too much force behind it. As I draw it out, I'm going to draw it out while twisting it so I can maintain that round shape. A little bit in the center here that's not quite round, but we're going to go over the whole thing again at the end. Getting there. A little more of an even taper going on. We haven't gained too much more length. This taper is looking a little more even, but it's not quite where I want it to be. So instead of squaring out the whole thing, I'm just going to square out the ends where I want the taper to start on both sides. Okay, and then I'll do the other side here. And then I'm just going to draw out that section. So I want a nice long taper and make sure I have the same length on both sides. Okay. I'm going to measure that with the calipers and then start the square there. So I've squared out both of the sides here, so I can start pulling out that taper a little bit cleaner, a little bit thinner, because I want it to be a really nice pronounced taper. See where we are lengthwise. Then I'm going to want to shift that taper a little bit towards the end because I want it to draw down really, really nice and small. All right, for the final ending tapers, I am going to switch back to the small 8-ounce hammer for the really fine detail work. And this has a more defined taper than it did before. So I will go ahead and replicate that on the other side. And then we'll see where we are in length. Just want to make sure that the taper is nice and even. So we're going to measure both ends. This one's at 0.08 inches, and this one is just under 0.06. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this one out a little more. Now, All right, we are now more or less even on the taper. So let's find out how we're doing lengthwise. We are just under our goal length of 6 3/4. I'm going to draw each one out a little bit more. And then I'm going to take the little square ends and I'm going to make them round again. And we'll see where we're at lengthwise then. All right. Both of these ends are now annealed, so we are ready to round them. And with any luck, we'll be just at our 6 3/4 inch goal. I am going to continue using the smaller hammer for this because that taper is so fine. I don't want it to be smashed. All right, we are getting close to rounded on the first one. I'm going to go ahead and anneal this end again so we can keep it nice and soft. All right, our first end seems to be pretty round. So we will move to the second one, get that annealed, and then we'll get that rounded and we'll see how we did. All right, we have a couple little flakes on here that I'm just gonna go ahead and get rid of. It's just on the very edge. It looks like it's just coming right over it. The flakes are very small, superficial. So as long as they're just nice and superficial, they won't affect the finished product, but we just don't want them to turn into anything else. Go ahead and anneal this end again. And then we're just about finished. We are just about rounded here. I want to check the tapers and make sure they're still nice and even. All right. The ends that were squared off have been rounded out again. So I'm going to measure the ends just to make sure that taper is still nice and even. And then make sure the end is round and no longer a rhombus shape as well. All right, the first one is at 0.6, 0.06, and 0.06. And then I would like to check the taper itself. So what does it start at? And what does it end at? and they are pretty even. So I'm going to anneal the entire wire again one more time. And then I'm going to go over the main body with the hammer just to make sure it's nice and round. No flat spots exist. There's no weird square spots in the middle. And I'm going to do this part with that small fine hammer as well, so I can get into those nice small spaces that maybe the bigger hammers can't quite reach. All right. Once the wire is completely smooth, and it'll take a little bit of time, a couple passes. Ideally, we would have had a nice smooth one to start, and it was pretty smooth. There were some hammer marks I really wanted to try to get out of here. All right. So once we are finished, we'll just run our hands down, make sure there's no flat spots, make sure there's no rhombus areas. We just want to make sure it's nice and smooth and rounded. If it's a little square, we'll try to work that out if we find any spots. Overall, it's not going to affect the final product too much. We don't want to hammer it while it's too hard. So then I just roll it in my fingers, make sure I don't feel any odd. Like that area is still a little bit square. So I'm going to anneal this spot again, give her another pass. Make sure that it gets nice and smooth out there. right. Once it's as smooth as possible, seems like that is perfect. Take one more measurement, make sure we got the right length. And we're a little bit over, but that's okay. Because we're gonna lose a little bit of this length when we twist it. And then we can always take it off at the final product. We can cut it a little bit shorter than necessary, and then we can gain some of that length back when the ends are fused and forged out. But here is our final product from half-ounce silver bar to a round rod that we can now use for plated or twisted pieces. It is a little bit of a time-consuming process. It takes a couple hours per wire, depending on how extensive your project is. If you're doing, for example, a Viking age plated piece in silver in a 3x2 twist, similar to like this one, it's going to take you probably about 5 to 6 hours to do all 6 of the wires, and then go through, and then you have to start the process of making the piece. But this is a more cost-effective way to buy a 1 ounce silver bar and get all the wires that you need. I would suggest, the 3 retailers I suggest are Apmex, JM Bullion, and Westminster Mint. Those are listed in the handout. Westminster Mint will be the cheapest option out of all 3 of them. They tend to historically have the lowest prices on silver bars. And they usually don't run out when other suppliers do. Apmex and JM Bullion have been out of stock for quite a while. Around this time, maybe a little earlier last year when COVID really hit, this cost of silver bottomed out. And so a lot of the people bought up the 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 5 ounce, 10 ounce bars when they were $10 to $12 an ounce, as opposed to the 30 that they are now. And so they're still trying to get that stock back in. But Westminster Mint seems to continually have stock when other places don't, and they're the cheapest. So I do recommend them the most. Any one of those, or any silver bullion, silver bar, silver coin dealer will be able to sell you bars or coins that you can cut up to use for jewelry. And then cutting it yourself and taking it from bar to wire rod is going to save you a little bit of money in the long run, and really take your piece and make it to a whole new level, from buying the wires and twisting them to forging everything yourself. It's a really cool experience to do it from beginning to end. So, any questions? Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you tuning into the class and the demonstration while we took the silver from bar to rod form and made the wire. So if you have any other questions, I'm on Facebook at Sean Geppert. Feel free to shoot me a message, send me a PM, and I'm always willing to help. The handout is in the chat, so feel free to save that and download it, print it, use it for future reference, and we'll be good to go. Thank you so much.